Good day everyone, I am Jude Adrian and Nicolas, the discussant for data reduction method and Criterion groups. Today we will be discussing few data reduction methods, the means of empirical criterion keying, and revisions of the Minnesota multiphasic personality inventory. So data reduction methods includes several types of statistical techniques collectively known as factor analysis or cluster analysis. It aids in the identification of the minimum number of variables or factors that account for the intercorrelations in observed phenomena. So simply put, data reduction methods stream down choices from a set of clusters or factors. So let's say that you are deciding on what color you should paint in your apartment. So since there are literally myriads of color choices, we attempt to identify the minimum number of variables or factors that account for the intercorrelations among all of these colors. You discover that there are 3 factors which might be labeled primary factors, or factor red, factor blue, and factor yellow, and 4 more factors which might be labeled as secondary or second order factors. So the latter set of factors being combinations of the first set of 3 factors, or factor red yellow or RY, factor RB, factor BY, or factor RYB. So in a manner similar to the factoring of all those shades of paint into 3 primary colors, this is also how personality traits are being factored into what psychologists refer to as the most important individual differences in human transactions. Forward with Raymond Bernard Cattell's 16 personality factor, or the 16 PF questionnaire. It indicated that 16 basic dimensions or source traits could be distilled from the original 36. So in 1949, and finally, Cattell's research culminated in the publication of a test called the 16 personality factor, or the 16 PF questionnaire. So for a short history of this, Cattell in 1946, 1947, and 1948 reviewed previous research by Alpert and Odbert in 1936, which suggested that there were more than 18,000 personality traits and terms in the English language. Next, Cattell added to the list some trait names and terms employed in the professional psychology and psychiatric literature, and then had judges rate just distinguishable differences between all the words. So the result was a reduction in the size of the list to 171 traits and names and terms. So further, Cattell reduced the number of names and terms to 36, which Cattell referred to as surface traits. Still more research indicated that 16 basic dimensions or source traits could still be distilled. So the 16PF provides a measure of personality and can also be used by psychologists and other mental health professionals as a clinical instrument to help diagnose psychiatric disorders and help with prognosis and therapy planning. Another is the Big Five. In this questionnaire, it measures the 5 factors of personality from the 5 factors model. So the convergent validity is demonstrated by the fact that the Big Five inventory 10, which correlates with the measures for subjective well-being like happiness, positive and negative affect, life satisfaction, and psychological well-being, and its dimensions. So you can see here the tabular difference between the Big Five and Cattell's 5. So from the 5-factor model of the Big Five, Cattell subcategorized those from the Big Five into 2 versions. So to proceed, another method, which is the NEO Personality Inventory Revised, is designed for use with persons 17 years of age and older and is essentially self-administered. It measures the 5 factors of the 5-factor model, which are the extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and openness. It provides a systematic assessment of emotional, experiential, interpersonal, attitudinal, and motivational styles, which are detailed personality descriptions that can be a valuable resource for a variety of professionals. Take note that the NeoPIR is self-administered and is available in two parallel versions. Each version contains 240 items and 3 validity items and requires a 6th grade reading level. Its area of assessment is for personality, and the assessment report type comes in the form of patient-reported outcomes. So nowadays, it is administered through computers. Now, this assessment is not free, it is costly. In US, it costs $68 per assessment, and administration may last at about 30 to 40 minutes. So for a better view of this method, you can browse the link that I have presented below. To proceed, the process of using criterion groups to develop test items is referred to as empirical criterion keying, because the scoring or keying of items has been demonstrated empirically to differentiate among groups of test takers. So empirical criterion keying is actually a method for developing personality inventories in which the items, which are presumed to measure one or more traits, are created and then administered to a criterion group of people known to possess a certain characteristic like antisocial behavior, significant anxiety, exaggerated concern about physical health, or malingering, and to also control group of people without those characteristics. So how is this grouping developed? So first, we create a large preliminary pool of test items from which the test items for the final form of the test will be used. Second is we administer the preliminary pool of items to at least two groups of people. Group 1 may be a criterion group composed of people known to possess the trait being measured. And the second is a randomly selected group of people who may or may not possess the trait being measured. Third is we conduct an item analysis to select items indicative of membership in the criterion group. So items in the preliminary pool that discriminate between membership in the two groups in a statistically significant fashion will be retained and incorporated in the final form of the test. Lastly is we obtain the data on test performance from a standardization of sample of test takers as presumed to be the future test takers. So the performance of group 2 members on the test would then become the standard against which future test takers will be evaluated. After the mean performance of group 2 members on the individual items or scales of the test has been identified, future test takers will be evaluated in terms of the extent to which their scores deviate in either direction from the group 2 mean. So from that process, you would then know how this keying is used as an assessment in which answers are scored in such a way as to establish differences in responses among groups that are already known to differ. Now, what is an example of a personality test that uses empirical keying? We have the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. So it contained a 566 true or false items and was designed as an aid to psychiatric diagnosis with adolescents and adults 14 years of age and older. As I was saying, this was designed using criterion keying, in which it analyzed the differences between groups of people. So for instance, the test was administered to people without a certain condition and to those with a certain condition, such as depression. Then the ways in which the groups differed on specific criteria was analyzed. Now this MMPI test in all of its forms is praised for being both valid and reliable. The test is reliable because it is standardized and consistent over time. So a patient taking the same test will receive a similar score at a later date. The test is also valid in that it measures what it purports to measure. On the other hand, much of what has been already said about the MMPI in terms of its general structure, administration, scoring, and interpretation is also applicable to the MMPI-2. So the MMPI personality test was updated in 1989 and thus became known as the Minnesota Multifaceted Personality Inventory's second version, or the MMPI-2. The MMPI-2 is intended to be administered and interpreted by a clinical psychologist or psychiatrist on patients over the age of 18. So later on, another version of the test will be discussed, like the MMPI for adolescents, which was developed to be administered to adolescents, and in 2008, a shorter version of the MMPI-2 test, known as the MMPI-2 restructured form, was also created. So more of this MMPI-2, the questions here are in also a true or false format. The 567 true or false MMPI questions assess a person's symptoms as well as how they view themselves in the context of mental and behavioral issues. The test is designed in such a way as to determine if patients are lying or trying to fake a condition, or malingering. For instance, the test has validity scales which assess if someone is lying, being defensive, or trying to make their condition look better or worse than it actually is. So in addition to the validity scales, the test uses clinical scales. These are test questions that have been grouped into scales to help determine a patient's personality traits and psychopathology and ultimately help find the correct diagnosis. Also, it uses criterion keying in the sense that it was designed to both separate subjects into normals and abnormals, and to subcategorize the abnormal group into specific classes. The MMPI-2 contains 10 clinical scales that assess major categories of psychopathology and 6 validity scales designed to assess test-taking attitudes. Also, we have the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory 2 restructured form, or the MMPI version 2 restructured form, published in 2008. It is a 338-item self-report test used by clinicians to assist with assessments of adult psychological dysfunction and treatment planning. The MMPI-2, however, only contains the restructured clinical scales. So in any case, administering the MMPI-2 is the same as administering the MMPI-2 restructured form. Another one is the MMPI-A. So it is an empirically based measure that is specialized and appropriated for adolescent psychopathology. It also aids in the problem identification, diagnosis, and treatments for youths or adolescents. The kits in MMPI-A costs $146, not including test forms and reports, support materials, and other materials offered. This is viable for adolescents aged 14 to 18 years and is done approximately 60 minutes or 1 hour and can be administered through online, computer, CD, or normally paper and pencil. So all in all, MMPI for adolescents help clinicians address problems that are likely to be seen with adolescents, like family issues, eating disorders, or drug dependency or chemical dependency. So generally, the MMPI burst onto the psychology scene in the 1940s and has become innovative, well-researched, and highly appealing instrument both in clinical practitioners and academic researchers globally. Impressively, it was developed without the benefit of high-speed computers, and this test has been the subject of thousands of research studies, which has been quite helpful and relevant over time. So that's it for my report. Hope you had a good time. Adios.